Hey guys, so public speaking, it's not fun. At least I don't think it's necessarily so for the many of us who may pick it up for the first 10 or 100 times and try it out. And while some of us may be fortunate enough to find jobs which don't really require us to speak in public all that often or do presentations perhaps, I think that in the case of the majority of us, we still sort of have to find ways and means to cope when it comes to speaking in public and communicating our ideas, especially when it's to a wider audience. And in my case personally, even though I think that I've been fortunate enough to have gained a lot of good Model United Nations experience and experiences doing case competitions during my time in high school as well as in university specifically, even now I feel the challenge of standing up and speaking and communicating my ideas effectively when it comes to speaking in front of wider audiences and larger crowds. And so while I personally am still definitely learning the ropes of what it means to be a good public speaker, I thought that I would just share my experience with you guys about the simple framework that's worked for me, or perhaps instead of framework, I should say the experience and process that's worked for me when it comes to how I've been able to improve my public speaking skills over time. And the framework itself is simple enough. It involves 3 steps. Firstly, it involves just getting inspired by the gifted speakers that might be all around us, honestly. Secondly, it's about listening to giants talk, and by giants, let me get into what this necessarily means a little bit later on. And finally, the final step is simply to pluck up the courage and to take the leap and to stand up and ultimately speak up. And essentially, that's the experience that I found has worked for me. So let's dive into it. So my name is John, and I'm an economics and global studies graduate at Monash University. And essentially how this works is that over the weekdays, I do brand marketing as it's my first full-time job actually. So I'm learning the ropes of what it means to do marketing for a brand, having never really studied it, having never really studied marketing in university, outside of perhaps one intro course. And over the weekends, what I do is that I manage this channel where I create and share content related to the triumphs and challenges of my work, the joys of weekends and hobbies, and honestly anything else that has helped me in the past and which I believe would hopefully add value to you as well. Hence why today we're talking about public speaking. So the first step, getting inspired. I think when it comes to this step or to this experience, it's really all about just stopping and being able to admire and appreciate the skill and the talent of those people who have already achieved a high degree of proficiency within the craft that you're trying to achieve. And in this case, it would be public speaking. But honestly, this sort of description will apply to those of you who are trying to achieve perfection or mastery in other crafts as well. And I think that this overall stage of getting inspired was beneficial to me in particular for 2 reasons especially. The first being that it's just a joy, I think, to behold and to be able to appreciate those people who are naturally gifted in a talent, or those people who have invested a lot of time into perfecting a craft, and to see them perform and to see them in action. And the second step, or I should say rather, the second benefit to being inspired and taking the time to be inspired by these people is that you gain the ability to benchmark what it means to perform at a high level of proficiency within this craft. And what I mean by this is that as beginners, I think it's sometimes a bit difficult to necessarily understand what it necessarily means to be able to perform as a master or as an expert within that subject material. But by looking and by listening to the best in the industry or in the market, so to speak, it helps you to set a benchmark for yourself, so that you will know what to aim at and what mastery would look like, so to speak. And even if I think in public speaking, there are different ways by which people can perform the craft, and there can be people who do it differently, yet both excellently. It still helps, I think, to just set that initial bar of what mastery in a craft can look like, even though you might want to necessarily go about it a different way. Okay, so if the first step was all about really getting inspired by the best in the industry, or if not even inspired, then just recognizing who are the best in that particular role or niche area, even when it comes to public speaking, because you can speak in public for a whole different range of purposes, whether it be to perhaps host or MC a wedding, to pitching a business presentation in front of a bunch of business professionals. So really, if the first step was really all about getting inspired and recognizing who are the best in the industry or in this specific niche, then the second step is really all about listening to these giants. And by giants, I just mean the experts and masters who have achieved a high level of proficiency in public speakings, perhaps in that niche you're looking for, and listening to them and learning from them. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this, in the sense that in my own personal experience, when I was joining the HSBC case competition, which is a case competition annually organized by HSBC, where there's both a national leg to it, and if you perform and essentially beat out all the other teams at the national level, then you're able to go to the international level and compete there against other teams from other countries. So essentially what was happening was that I was in the national leg of it, and my team and I were preparing for the competition. We were going through cases, practice cases, trying to essentially brush up on our case analysis skills, our case structuring skills. One part of the practice that I took upon myself was that I really wanted to learn from how the other teams performed from previous years. And so we had actually access to how the previous year's national team as well as the previous year's international teams had performed. And so what I did was that I took a look at their videos, and then I would just watch and rewatch the team's presentations. I would even perhaps focus on specific individual speakers and just watch again and again and again how this one person was doing his introduction, was layering and structuring his introductions, perhaps so that I could mimic and perhaps incorporate his own style and learn from him how he was structuring his points, so that I could incorporate it into how I would do it for my own cases in the future. And I think I was just rewatching and doing as much as I could to scrutinize and break down what this guy was saying, so that I could understand his thought process and understand how he was structuring his ideas, so that I could do it for myself. And even though the content obviously would be different, in the sense that I would not be called upon to present on the same subject matter as he was presenting on, I think that I wanted to really take that exercise on, just because I felt that I really wanted to just understand how these people were structuring their ideas, and also the techniques that they were using, and adopt what appealed to me specifically for how I presented, for how I would do my presentation. So essentially, that's the second step, I think. When it comes to this whole framework, it's about really listening to how the best in the industry talk, and about learning from them, taking what we can from them, and incorporating it into our own style of speech. Because I think that when it comes to public speaking, there's opportunity for each of us to have our own variations of how we do the speaking. Okay, so the final step is probably the simplest, and also at the same time the scariest. And that's to simply pluck up the courage to stand up and to speak, and to essentially take the leap. And I'm not sure, honestly, whether this step gets any easier over time. Personally, I've done about 20 plus Model United Nations conferences back during my high school days. I was a bit of an MUN junkie back in my time, though there were people who did more conferences than me, some who did like 30 plus conferences, but that's a bit besides the point. In any case, aside from the conferences, I've done a couple of case competitions since then, and I'm not sure if it gets any easier to necessarily take that leap, right, each time to stand up and speak. And I think that perhaps also not all of my presentations and not all of my speeches have necessarily landed or made the impression that I've wanted them to. But at the same time, I think it's just good to keep in mind that even if we sometimes fall down on our faces, it's still possible for us to stand up on the shoulders of the titans that have walked before us, right? And to learn from them and to speak. And as a testament to that, at that case competition that I was sharing across with you before, I was actually able to land and to essentially receive the competition's most eloquent speaker award at the national level. And though our team didn't end up winning that competition, we placed second overall in the Malaysian leg of it. We still did a really good job, and we were still able to perform well. And in my case, that was, I think, the first time where I was really recognized for my speaking skills overall. Even during my Model United Nations conferences, I think even accounting for that, I think this was the first point in time where I was recognized for my ability to communicate my ideas properly. And so I think that's just an important thing to keep in mind, that even though you might not necessarily think that you're speaking very well, or that you're perhaps improving as much as you wanted to, or improved as much as you wanted to, it's just a good thing to keep in mind that we might not necessarily be the best judges when it comes to evaluating our own skills. Alright, okay, so hopefully that 3-step process or experience of getting inspired, i.e. recognizing the best people in the market, listening to giants talk, and finally taking that leap to stand up and speak, was useful to you all. If not all of it, then at least some of it. But let me know in the comments if you guys found this video, if the message that I was sharing across with you guys was useful to you all, if you guys would like me to share across on other experiences of mine when it comes to public speaking, or even to other things that you guys might be interested in. I will be looking to share across on more videos related to either helping young professionals like yourself and myself, perhaps, essentially add value to our lives while still trying to stay sane in this crazy working world. And one other thing, I think, just to leave you guys on the last note, is that when it comes to speaking, when it comes to learning from people who are already good in the craft, I would say that it's also important to keep in mind a framework that you personally have, which you use when you go about analyzing and scrutinizing and learning from these people. And so I personally used a framework, the SCQA framework, and also the pyramid principle framework in mind when I was learning from these best people, from these top performers during the HSBC case competition. So if that's also a framework that you'd like me to get into or cover in a future video, then do let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, have a good weekend, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.